The city of Cape Coral emerged on the western coast of Florida in 1957. Over 6 decades, through the persistence of local residents and newcomers, this formerly empty coastline of meadowsweet fields and livestock farms transformed into a powerful settlement with a population of nearly 200,000 people. The city's uniqueness lies in its extensive canal system, which earned Cape Coral the nickname of a city with unparalleled waterfront areas. In this urban settlement lived 35-year-old Christine Melton and 43-year-old Diana Ruiz. Although they were not acquainted with each other, fate would bring them together under tragic circumstances through a cold-blooded killer in the autumn of 2019. The details of this extraordinary event not only shook American media but also caused significant resonance in social networks, particularly TikTok, extending well into 2024. Christine Melton was born and raised in Will County, Illinois. During her high school years, she became friends with Okipa Ni Sellers, who would become her closest friend for many years. Together, the girls prepared for academic exams, completed homework, spent sleepless nights exchanging their most intimate dreams and future plans. Christine had a special passion for cats and traveling. The friends frequently changed their place of residence, wandering through different states in search of work in local cafes. After a prolonged stay in Colorado, they decided to move to Florida, where they again found work as waitresses in one of the local restaurants. Wherever fate would take them, their friendship only grew stronger. In Cape Coral, Christine rented an apartment in a duplex, a small house divided into 2 separate living spaces for 2 families. The money she earned was spent not only on her own needs but also on regularly helping her elderly mother, who lived nearby. According to Sellers, they were as close as 2 peas in a pod. On the evening of October 6, 2019, Christine Melton and Steffa Nesslers, as usual, decided to spend time together. They chose to attend a musical show at a bar in Fort Myers, located 20 minutes drive from Cape Coral. According to Stephanie's account, as they were climbing the stairs to the 2nd floor of the establishment, a man named Wade Wilson unexpectedly appeared before them. He immediately started a casual conversation and introduced himself to the friends, using, as it turned out later, a fictitious name. Steffa noted during the court hearing that at the time, he made an impression of being friendly and charming. The atmosphere was cheerful, everyone was slightly intoxicated. Nothing suspicious was happening, Sellers testified. She emphasized that neither she nor Melton noticed any suspicious signals that evening. And Wade Wilson at that moment had not yet demonstrated his terrifying character traits. After the bar closed, the girls went home with their new acquaintance. They spent several hours there. Then the 3 of them left the premises. They initially planned to get to Christine Melton's residence. However, Wilson, being in an alcohol-induced state, could not drive. So the girls called an Uber taxi service. Arriving at the desired address and hurrying to take her son to an educational institution, Sellers sincerely hugged her friend and said goodbye, arranging to meet the next day. However, this meeting would remain forever unfulfilled. Steffa had no idea about any potential problems with Christine. That day, she was working a shift, and since her friend was on a day off, Sellers assumed she was simply sleeping off the eventful previous night. Therefore, she did not bother Christine with additional messages. On October 7, Diana Ruiz headed to work, an extraordinarily responsible woman raising a son. Those who knew her always spoke about her exclusively positively, characterizing her as an honest and conscientious person. In 2019, Diana was in a serious relationship that seemed destined to end in marriage. She worked as a waitress and bartender at a hotel establishment in Cape Coral. The last person to see her was her younger son Zane, who was actively preparing for his school graduation and sincerely hoped that his mother would attend the debut concert of his music group. Her work colleagues repeatedly emphasized her impeccable work discipline. In 5 years of working at the bar, Diana had never missed a work shift. That is why her sudden absence on October 7, 2019, immediately caused serious concern. When it became clear that the woman had not returned home, they immediately contacted law enforcement with a missing person report. Almost simultaneously with the missing person report, the police arrived at Christine Melton's residence, where they discovered a horrifying scene: the girl's body. Law enforcement also noticed the disappearance of Christine's black car. The forensic examination meticulously documented cruel injuries, numerous bruises on the face and body, swollen eyes, abrasions all over her head. Internal organs had also sustained significant damage. The liver, lungs, and gallbladder wall showed destructive injuries. Diana Ruiz's body was found only 3 days later. Her corpse, bearing signs of violent death and a broken neck, was discovered in a field near one of the local bars. The investigation established shocking circumstances. On October 7, an unknown man approached her under the pretext of asking for help with local orientation. Diana, being kind and empathetic, agreed to help and got into the stranger's vehicle. While continuing to drive with one hand, the man unexpectedly began to strangle the woman. Stopping, he discovered that Diana was still alive. The perpetrator left her on the ground, got back behind the wheel, and intentionally ran over her body 10 to 20 times, turning her into an almost unrecognizable mass. Afterward, he dragged the body to nearby bushes and disappeared. On Thursday, October 6, 2019, Melissa Montanez went to a bar in Cape Coral with her boyfriend, Wade Wilson. At that point, they had been dating for 6 months. The couple enjoyed spending leisure time in bars, viewing such a way of spending time as an opportunity to make new acquaintances and have fun. During the party, Wade met an unknown girl, and they engaged in a lively conversation. After the conversation, he convinces Melissa to continue celebrating at the house of his new friend. However, she categorically refuses. An acute, emotional argument flares up between the lovers. Wade Wilson claims he urgently needs to retrieve something from Melissa's car. Soon, after examining the nearly empty bar, she noticed that her boyfriend had not yet returned. Going outside, she headed to where her car was parked, a gray Dodge Challenger. However, at the parking spot, the girl did not find her vehicle. Wade Wilson left a party using his girlfriend's car. It can be presumed that he headed to a woman he had met previously. Early in the morning, the intoxicated man calls Melissa and insists on meeting near her workplace. The girl arrives on time, but immediately senses something unusual. Wade arrives not in Melissa's car, but in an unknown black Nissan. The girl approaches the vehicle and begins questioning the guy about the disappearance of her automobile. Instead, Wade aggressively suggests she get into the car to discuss everything. When Melissa refuses, the man begins to use physical force. The man attempts to forcibly drag the girl into the car, pulling at her dress, which nearly tears. A crowd of passers-by forms around the pair. Despite this, none of them called law enforcement. Melissa manages to break free and hide in the nearest cafe. Within a short period, police officers arrive. The girl provides a detailed account of the incident to the law enforcement officers, also reporting calls from an unknown number. Later, it would be revealed that this phone number belonged to Christine Melton. Police officers from the Keys unit approached the vehicle where Wade Wilson was located. This moment was captured on a service body camera that automatically activates in such situations. The law enforcement officer notices a young man with a bare torso, who is clearly intoxicated. The officer reports the call and begins questioning the suspect, who responds evasively and vaguely. The police officer asks the man to remain at the scene until backup arrives, but Wade ignores this requirement and leaves the scene. Wade Wilson, born on May 20, 1994, in Fort Myers, attracted the attention of internet users due to the coincidence of his name and surname with a comic book character. However, these similarities were purely coincidental. Wade's biological father was only 15 years old at the time of conception, and his mother was 14. The underage parents were not prepared to take responsibility for raising a child. The biological mother of the boy had serious mental health issues and struggled with drug addiction. Wade's biological parents were members of the Wilson family's church community, which had 2 daughters. Shortly after the boy's birth, they decided to put him up for adoption. According to the adoptive family's testimony, Wade felt balanced during childhood. In his educational institution, he had no problems with communication or social adaptation. He was not bullied, received good grades, and was actively involved in sports. During his teenage years, the boy sustained several traumatic head injuries during sports training. Some of the sustained injuries caused a concussion, which could have potentially led to negative changes in Wade's mental state. Overall, up to a certain period, he had been quite calm and compliant. At 13 years old, after being placed in a foster family, the boy changed dramatically. Gloomy thoughts began to haunt him. He increasingly isolated himself in his room, almost completely ceasing communication with his family. By his own account, it was at this age that Wade first tried forbidden substances, subsequently becoming dependent. The foster father unexpectedly discovered prohibited substances on the teenager and immediately notified law enforcement. However, Wade was released the very next day in accordance with the Baker Act. This legislative act provides for the release of an individual in the presence of mental health issues. Instead of traditional punishment, the suspect is assigned mandatory medical examination in a specialized crisis center or hospital. There were instances when Wade Wilson was temporarily suspended from education due to trading forbidden substances directly within school premises. Such situations seem almost incredible, yet they do exist within the American system. A local journal conducted extensive interviews with more than 3 of Wilson's former classmates after the known events, in order to ascertain additional details of his biography. One woman who studied alongside him shared specific circumstances of their school life. According to her, they belonged to the same group and often sat next to each other during lunch breaks. We would strangely pass something to each other without eating, she recalled, adding that she had once dated Wilson's close friend, who also had a dubious reputation. Wilson constantly wore a black hoodie, which was also characteristic of her former boyfriend. They always looked creepy together, the woman noted, reminiscing about their school years. She claims that Wilson was the first person with whom she tried tobacco products at 14 years old. We would smoke in the forest before classes, and after the first time, it became a daily habit. Sometimes we were alone, sometimes my boyfriend would join us. However, every time I was alone with Wade, he never demonstrated any threatening intentions, she recounted. According to her observations, he would sometimes spend time with her and her boyfriend. However, he predominantly was either with his girlfriend or flirting with others. The woman stated that Wilson despised any authority and was expelled from school for smoking in the bathroom and the related toilet paper fire. Another woman shared memories of a brief relationship with Wilson in 2012. She claimed that he showed no respect and constantly cheated. In one incident, she discovered money missing from her purse, considering Wilson to be the culprit. The woman claimed that the incident occurred long before the beginning of her relationship with Wilson. She reported the event to a teacher, after which the principal entered the classroom, intending to clarify the circumstances. The school administration did not allow students to leave the premises after the end of the lesson, and none of those present confessed to the act. The administration clearly announced, the person who removed the money and bag must immediately confess so that the rest of the students can continue their school day. Otherwise, the class will be forced to remain in the classroom throughout the day. However, no student dared to tell the truth. This incredibly outraged me, as he had been mocking me for a long time and then began to stalk and harass me, the woman said emotionally. Wilson's former classmate characterized him as a rather challenging teenager. He did not maintain relationships with students who planned to continue their education in college. One could say that they were not even close acquaintances. The man shared details of Wilson's school life. Predominantly, Wilson communicated with youth who had disciplinary problems. It seemed that he simply existed among those similar to himself. The interviewee added that Wilson constantly went beyond what was permitted, committing quite risky acts, from unauthorized intrusion onto private property to damaging cars. Even without an obvious material benefit, he simply enjoyed challenging rules and circumstances. Among Wilson's classmates, there was an almost unanimous opinion about his foster parents. One student characterized them as extremely kind, religious people who sincerely sought to provide him with the best life possible. Wilson was given literally everything, a former classmate stated categorically. He had a cozy house in the city, loving foster parents, although they did not belong to the wealthy social strata. However, for inexplicable reasons, Wade did not appreciate such support, perceiving it almost as a given. Another student recalled a telling incident when Wilson stole his parents' car and disappeared for 3 full days. "As far as I know, his parents were incredibly loving," another classmate reported. "I was not personally acquainted with them, but I always felt deep empathy. They made incredible efforts to keep their son under control, but all their attempts proved futile." On one occasion, the teenager's psychological state significantly deteriorated. He developed paranoid moods. He felt that someone was watching the family and constantly insisted on tightly closed blinds. Wade was also haunted by hallucinations. He claimed to have seen some strange creature in the garage. Wade's foster father was completely bewildered, as he found no confirmation of his son's stories. A logical question inevitably arises: how could a mental disorder in a child go unrecognized, and why were no appropriate measures taken? This question will apparently remain without a clear answer. The foster father was completely at a loss, as he had observed no one near the garages. Moreover, his wife once went to the extreme measure of calling the police to confirm to Ueda the absence of anyone near the garages. At the age of 18, Ueda attempted to establish a relationship with his biological father, Stephen Tostasika. They mostly maintained telephone contact. Stephen noted that his son primarily contacted him for pragmatic reasons, mostly to obtain financial assistance. It's worth highlighting 2 significant episodes in Ueda's biography. At ages 18 and 20, he suffered head injuries as a result of car accidents, where the vehicle he was in collided with a tree. At least one of these incidents caused a concussion. Medical examinations in the form of computer tomography, conducted after each accident, did not reveal any structural damages or fractures. From 2010 onward, Ueda's life was characterized by continuous involvement in criminal situations. He was repeatedly accused of committing 20 different crimes, including violent assaults and fraudulent activities. It was quite obvious that Ueda had at least some mental disorder, but his foster family did not pay proper attention to this. It is quite likely that Ueda had a genetic predisposition to mental illnesses. Presumably, his biological mother, when she was finally found, suffered from a certain condition that could have played a critically important role in shaping Ueda Ilsen's personality. Additional influencing factors could have been the head traumas he experienced at a young age. The author invites readers to ponder these questions. Could these circumstances have influenced Ueda Ilsen's personality? Could the negative consequences have been avoided if the foster parents had timely noticed and responded to the problems? Interesting details were disclosed by Ueda's former girlfriend named Kyle. According to her testimony, they were dating in 2018 to 2019, shortly before his relationship with Melissa Montanez. The first 6 months of their relationship were not accompanied by violence. However, around 2019, the situation changed dramatically. Ueda tied up the girl and pushed her car, resulting in an incident in Floridores. Keel immediately contacted law enforcement, but the police did not investigate the case. Initially, her boyfriend claimed he would call Stephen, but later the girl learned his actual name through a postal letter addressed to Ida and containing information about his daughter. Additionally, Keel reported that she contacted another of Ueda's ex-girlfriends, who also claimed instances of violence. However, all the charges were later dropped. At the beginning of their relationship, the girl claimed that A had never touched forbidden substances. However, the situation dramatically changed later. One day, she discovered a glass pipe in their shared living space. Police were forced to conceal some details of this incident, though they remained quite accessible. A was left with numerous undeniable pieces of evidence, from telephone conversations with his father to video recordings from road cameras. Part of his actions had an overtly absurd character, which later became the basis for Wilson's legal defense. After attacking the girl near her workplace and fleeing the scene, Ueda decided to leave the city. Driving through the parking lot, he traveled about 10 kilometers from Fort Myers to the Hancock parking lot in Cape Coral. Soon after, he called Joshua Lukic, a former work colleague who at that time was working in Patricia. Upon arrival, Ueda began begging Josh to buy him a ticket, whether for a plane or a bus, just to escape. He confessed that he had done terrible things. However, Joshua did not indulge him and immediately dialed the emergency service 911. On October 8, 2019, Ueda Wilson was arrested, exactly the day after Christine Melton's body was discovered. By the time of his detention, he had already broken into the house of an elderly married couple. Local residents saw him bloody and shirtless while wandering the street. The police report notes that during the arrest, Wilson was in a state of alcohol or drug intoxication. The investigation discovered video footage from a police recorder, clearly showing Wilson driving Melton's car, which he had stolen after the murder to reach his ex-girlfriend, attack her, and escape from Florida. It is assumed that this occurred shortly after the murder of Tiana Ruiz. Video materials from one angle clearly show damage to the front bumper, as if from hitting a person. The most significant evidence of Ueda Wilson's involvement in two murders were the testimonies of his biological father, Stephen Testasica. On October 7, the young man called his father and confessed to the committed crimes. "I killed," Stephen quoted their conversation during the court hearing. At first, he thought his son was just making something up. Wade was extremely agitated and wanted his father to feel the same emotional tension, emphasizing that he was ready to repeat his actions. Stephen only believed the truthfulness of his son's words after a second phone call later that same day. In his own interview with a journalist, Wade Wilson claimed that Melton personally allowed him to take her belongings and car. However, at that moment, the girl was already dead. The defendant also stated that on the day of Diana Ruiz's death, he personally drove her to a bus stop. However, the journalist noted that this version raised serious suspicions. The combination of evidence, video recordings, witness testimonies, statements from Wilson's former girlfriends about previous instances of violence, and the conversation with his father, were sufficient to initiate criminal proceedings. The investigation dragged on for several years. Soon after the arrest, the COVID-19 pandemic and Black Lives Matter protests began, causing court hearings to be constantly postponed. Wilson confessed to the murders during his initial police interrogation, to his father, and to his ex-girlfriends, but later retracted his statements. While in prison, he dramatically changed his appearance, getting several facial tattoos, including a controversial symbol that inevitably drew the attention of the jury. While expensive suits at every court hearing might have raised doubts about his guilt, the tattoo near his eye with a controversial symbol unambiguously indicated the potential danger of the defendant. It should be noted that tattoos are a characteristic feature of Florida inmates. According to statistics, they are present in 3 out of 4 local prisoners. During the trial, new telling details emerged. Expertise proved that Wade Wilson attacked Christine Melton while she was asleep. His actions immediately awakened the woman, who began actively resisting. The fierce resistance was evidenced by broken nails, numerous bruises all over her body, and a brain contusion. An unexpected moment was when Wilson asked the woman for directions to a school. After this, Christine got into his car, but the court never clarified the reason for her action. Perhaps he threatened her, or Ruiz, being too kind, decided to help a stranger, which became a fatal mistake. During the legal defense, Wilson acknowledged that he saw fear on the victim's face. The judge, addressing the jury, emphasized, he killed 2 innocent victims. One, during her intentions to have a good time, the other, simply on her way to work. In court, they also explained the details of Wade's phone conversation with Sudds, which was recorded on a dictaphone, with the young man's mother present nearby. It was after yet another phone call that his mother contacted law enforcement at the address provided by her son. Meanwhile, Wilson's attorneys were making last-minute efforts to secure the most lenient sentence possible for their client. Specifically, they emphasized to the judge the forensic expert's testimony about the impossibility of definitively determining the victim's state of consciousness during the attack. However, the court decisively rejected these arguments, insisting that the marks on the victims' bodies clearly demonstrated that the women not only were aware of the danger but also actively attempted to resist the attacker. During the court proceedings, an emotional letter from Wilson's sister, Wendy, was read aloud. "The boy I knew is still somewhere inside. But a monster, blinded by addiction, has taken over him. I cannot love him less because madness has stolen him from us. Shackle this monster." Among the participants in the court process was a psychiatrist who conducted a series of in-depth interviews with Wilson and his closest circle, attempting to understand the origins of the crime. According to the expert's professional observations, Wilson did not demonstrate tendencies toward aggressive behavior in childhood. Radical changes in his character began approximately at the age of 13. According to family accounts, he became more irritable, withdrawn, and paranoid. The psychiatrist shared a telling example recounted by the defendant's mother. At ages 15 to 16, Wilson began seeing phantom people on the street, which led him to repeatedly cover windows to prevent these imaginary figures from watching or harming him. Such striking behavioral changes, in the specialist's opinion, likely indicate the presence of a serious mental disorder. This encompassed potential diagnoses of schizophrenia or an undiagnosed bipolar personality disorder. The lack of proper treatment, neglect of medical observation, and refusal to take necessary medications could have triggered a disease exacerbation, developing paranoia, hallucinations, and uncontrolled aggressive outbursts in adulthood. However, establishing a definitive diagnosis would require significantly more time and comprehensive examinations. Ultimately, the court heard Wendy Wilson's emotional plea to be rid of the monster. Considering the incredible brutality of the crime and the conviction that Wade Wilson derived sadistic pleasure from his actions, the jury chose the most severe form of punishment, the death penalty. Currently, their decision is being considered as a recommendation, with the final sentence to be handed down by the judge at the final hearing. There is a possibility that Wilson might be sentenced to life imprisonment instead of execution. If the psychiatrist's opinion is taken into account, in the event of a life sentence, the defendant would need to undergo multiple medical examinations and a prolonged course of psychotherapy. Traditionally, the execution of death sentences in the state of Florida takes place in one of the state facilities in Rayford, located 45 miles from Jacksonville. A private individual can serve as an executor of a death sentence. Such a service is compensated with a monetary reward of $150, with the identity of the executor remaining confidential. The effectiveness of the death penalty remains a controversial topic, despite its long-standing application. Human rights advocates argue that this form of punishment has minimal impact on the criminal situation. Crime statistics demonstrate an almost imperceptible reduction in offenses. Moreover, human rights advocates emphasize the lack of humanity in any methods of taking life. They underscore that even the most sophisticated judicial system is not immune to human error. In July 2024, Wade Wilson was found guilty on 2 counts of charges. The jury unanimously supported the imposition of the death penalty. The final court decision was to be rendered on July 23, 2024, either life imprisonment without the possibility of parole or execution. However, assumptions about Wilson's cessation of criminal activity after imprisonment proved false. Additional charges were brought against him for 2 incidents committed while in custody, concerning Christian Melton and Diana Ruiz. On September 13, 2020, Wade Wilson and his cellmate named Joseph attempted to escape through the roof of the facility. Correctional officers conducted a thorough inspection of the cell, discovering several suspicious details. The window's metal frame was displaced, the protective glass had multiple cracks, and a metal stool previously fixed to the concrete floor had been dismantled. The investigation established that Wilson was the organizer of the planned escape, which led to an additional charge. On April 20, 2023, Wilson and 5 other individuals were arrested for offenses related to prohibited substances. Law enforcement analyzed the phone conversations of inmates and discovered Wilson's contacts with an unknown person named Voni Vagins, particularly through social media. Subsequently, the police conducted a covert investigation, during which they observed Vagins and 3 other suspects outside the prison. By summer 2024, video materials from a court hearing emerge featuring a tattooed man in an impeccable business suit, Wilson. Among underage girls, there is a rapid fascination with this attractive criminal. A significant number of edited video materials about Wilson appear on social networks, accompanied by romanticized comments. I managed to find additional information about Wade and in glasses, who is likely a member of his defense team. Interestingly, in social circles, they are actively compared to comic book characters, the Joker and Harley Quinn, finding a striking similarity between them. In social networks, a large-scale information campaign in support of Wade Wilson began. One account collected an impressive number, about 70,000 subscribers. Fan communities actively call on the public to sign a petition to cancel the death sentence, expressing sincere sympathy for his fate. Supporters leave numerous comments in Wilson's defense, demonstrating emotional support. Such phenomena in 2024 seem quite strange. Experts explain this as the phenomenon of so-called beauty privilege. Research shows that physically attractive people evoke more trust and sympathy. There is an attraction towards them, and even overtly brazen behavior can be perceived indulgently. In contrast, less attractive individuals find it much more difficult to count on such treatment. Their similar behavior is immediately perceived as rudeness. In Wade Wilson's case, the pinnacle of his social resonance emerged precisely through the beauty privilege phenomenon. He demonstrated a stunning pattern. Such unlawful actions can remain unpunished exclusively due to a person's external attractiveness. By 2024, at the court hearing, in addition to Wade Wilson and the court system staff, the closest relatives of the deceased were present. The sisters of Kristen Melton presented her exceptionally positive life portrait. Her personality was difficult to convey in words, but they made an extraordinarily emotional attempt. Kristen was invaluable not only to her relatives but to her entire surroundings. She embodied numerous family roles: daughter, sister, aunt, niece, and cousin. Her environment valued her for her cheerfulness and natural kindness. Her intelligence was distinguished by its unconventionality and sharpness. Kristen possessed a unique sense of humor that made absolutely everyone around her smile. With her, an atmosphere of genuine joy and positivity reigned daily. Being near Kristen created a feeling of complete safety and total acceptance. She was a bearer of a special life philosophy that inspired those around her. Her presence alone had a therapeutic effect. The tragedy of the situation was that Kristen was forever deprived of the opportunity for motherhood, a purpose for which she seemed to have been born. She embodied the best human qualities: strength of spirit, courage, independence, and unconditional loyalty. As a friend, Kristen was unique. She worried about others' problems much deeper than the owners of those problems themselves. Her support was unconditional. She always stood by a close person's side, even when their wrongdoing was obvious. Love for travel and world exploration was her defining characteristic. Until October 7, 2019, she loved her surroundings absolutely, sincerely, and fully. Kristen's mother could not be present at the court hearing. After such a loss, she was forever changed. Diana Ruiz's younger son presented an extremely emotional account of the devastating impact of events caused by Wade Wilson on his life. I was forced to radically change my place of residence to pursue education. Moving far from Florida, I essentially grew up without a stable environment. I was raised by my mother, and one terrible day, she was gone. Despite everything, I tried not to give up. My mother had great hopes for me and was confident in my potential for success. And I absolutely do not intend to disappoint her, even post-mortem. This becomes my daily motivator to move forward. None of my future achievements will my mother see. She will not witness my most important life events, marriage, graduating from an educational institution, obtaining my first professional position. During my college studies, I first ended up in the emergency medical department due to a car accident. And the only person I wanted to call was my mother. At the moment of her disappearance, I completely relied on my own intuition. My inner voice insisted that she would return, and I trusted no one except her. I was informed about her disappearance while moving from our stop. I learned about her death last. On my 17th birthday, I was on the verge of an existential crisis, unable to come to terms with the reality of life without a mother. 5 years without her, and not a single day without thoughts about her. My mother was the embodiment of boundless love. Her only aspiration was to provide me with the best life possible. She did not deserve the tragic fate that befell her. Her sole desire was to live an ordinary, peaceful life. During the prosecutor's closing statement, notable attention was drawn to the brutality of Wade Wilson's actions. At the moment of the charges being announced, a malicious, almost sarcastic smile flickered across the defendant's face. The defense argued that Wade Wilson was under the influence of unknown prohibited substances. Their rhetoric created an impression that something hidden and impure lurked in his actions. At the same time, they attempted to portray him as an ordinary guy about whom his surroundings spoke exclusively positively. This is not an excuse for his actions, they emphasized. We merely seek for you to understand the psychological state of the defendant during the events of October 7th. This man is not the true Wade Wilson. He does not deserve the most severe sentence, execution. A fundamental question arises: why did this happen? What caused such cruelty towards two defenseless, wonderful women? Is it due to mental disorders and harmful habits, or is a true psychopath standing before the court? Yes, he is seriously ill. He likely has multiple psychological deviations, experts stated. The awareness of the existence of such individuals in society evokes deep horror. Perhaps behind all the aggression and violence lies a fundamental need for love. Children, especially at an early age, crave parental attention and affection. Wade Wilson's father, being an elderly person, could have provided him support. One might feel sympathy for little Wade Wilson, up to the point when he crossed the boundary of humanity. Children often do not understand their own emotional states, especially when experiencing mental disorders. And if biological or adoptive parents reject a child, they are left alone with their destructive thoughts, feeling superfluous and unwanted. This is an extremely controversial story, psychologists summarized. However, the women deserve the most compassion, absolutely innocent victims of a horrible tragedy. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Until next time, friends.